Hola, it's Wednesday, October 2nd. I'm Robert Ferringo with Doc Sports, here with a free NHL season win total and kind of a minor NHL preview video for you. Be sure to check me out at docsports.com. That's www.docsports.com, www.docsports.com. So I say that we're going to give you a minor NHL preview because I'm not going to preview both conferences, all of the teams, all that stuff. I'm also not going to break down how to bet the NHL. There's plenty of other videos for that. Instead, I just want to touch on a few of the things that I'm going to be looking at, a few of the teams that I like and don't like heading into the NHL season. Before I get to that, I would like to point out that I have 7 of 10 winning NHL seasons, and from 2009 to 2013, I was basically the preeminent NHL handicapper in the industry. Won over $21,000 for my clients in that 4-year span. All 4 of them were winning years. And over my career, for over 10 years, I have hit 58% of all of my top NHL plays rated 5 units or higher. I'm looking forward to this season. I like the NHL. I'm a big fan of having a money line sport in the fall and the winter. You know, you get beat on a backdoor basket in college basketball. You get beat on a backdoor made free throw in the NBA. Well, that night you won your NHL game because you picked the winner and they won and you cashed the ticket. And it's always nice to have that kind of counterbalance to those spread sports, which can be oh so frustrating during the winter. So I'm looking forward to this season. And one of the things that I do at the beginning of the hockey season, just like I do at the beginning of the college football season, is I look at the rankings, all right? And to a certain extent, I do this in the NFL with playoff teams also. But in college football, what I like to do is look at the preseason top 10 rankings. And if you go back over the last 15 years, you'll find unequivocally that every year, 2 teams in the preseason top 10 in college football are not ranked at the end of the year. Okay, think about that for a second. If you start the season in the top 10, you're on the short list of national championship contenders. 2 of those teams every year for the last 15 years, on average, I shouldn't say every year, on average, they finished unranked. That's how big people miss with those teams. You see it a lot in the NFL, all right? 12 teams make the playoffs every year. Half of those teams usually don't make it back. Now, the numbers aren't that extreme in the NHL, but typically what you'll find, and just looking over the last 4 or 5 years, I know that's a small sample size, but for the sake of argument, it's good enough to show what I'm certain would be a 20-year trend if somebody wants to dig in on the last 20 years of this, is that if you look at the 8 teams in each NHL conference that made the playoffs last year, what you're going to find is that at least 2, I shouldn't say at least, on average, 2 of the top 5 seeds in each conference, so an average of either 3 or 4 teams of the top 10, essentially, in the NHL don't make the playoffs the following year. So, for example, in the Western Conference last year, Calgary, San Jose, Nashville, Winnipeg, St. Louis, those were the top 5 seeds in the Western Conference last year. At least one of those teams isn't going to make the playoffs this year, and the odds suggest that 2 of them will not make the playoffs this year. So I like to take a very macro approach to my handicapping in all sports. So instantly I look at those 5 teams and I say, okay, who don't we like? Knowing that these teams are going to be priced according to what they accomplished last year. So who don't we like? You find those teams that you don't like, and those are the teams to bet against, especially early in the season, because the odds makers are going to be setting these money lines based on who these guys were last year. They're not the same teams. Injuries, free agency, age, just different situations. You're not the same person you were 8 months ago, 10 months ago, 12 months ago. Neither are these people. So we have to handicap them completely differently. So again, in keeping with the Western Conference here, Calgary, they're definitely a team that I'm looking to bet against this year. And I like their season win total under 97.5 points. They have been a very up and down team. Very, very good, very, very not good over the last 5 years. I thought that they massively overachieved. They actually came from 11th place in the 2017-2018 season to number 1 in the Western Conference last year. That's a massive jump. And frankly, when I look at their roster, it's kind of unsustainable. They're not that much better than everyone that I expect them to finish in first or second place again this year. I could see them dropping down to 5th or 6th, to be honest with you. I don't think they're going to be one of our teams that don't make the playoffs, but I don't think that they're going to threaten 100 points on the season again. And I know they're not going to finish in first place again. San Jose. San Jose, very tricky team to get a wrap on. They have finished 6th, 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 and 2nd in the last 4 years. Okay? Is this the year that they take their step back, similar to what we saw at Anaheim last year? It's very possible. Nashville, they made that big PK Subban trade. They've been in the playoffs 4 straight years. 2 years ago, they were the number 1 seed in the West. Last year, they were number 3. They have made a Stanley Cup Finals in the last several years. Is this the year that they go off the cliff? I don't think so. They're a team that I still like. Next, we have Winnipeg. Winnipeg was one of the big surprises in hockey 2 years ago. Finished in 2nd place. Last year, finished in 4th place. We're bounced in the first round. We're a bit of a disappointment, really. And then number 5 is St. Louis, the defending Stanley Cup champions. Yes, I'm looking to bet against Winnipeg. I absolutely will be looking to bet against the defending Stanley Cup champions, if for no other reason that their momentum will not carry over from one season to the other. That's not how professional sports work. See examples of teams for the last 25 years in all major sports. So out of those top 5 teams, 4 of them I feel pretty comfortable saying they are not going to maintain their position from last year. Every one of those 4 teams that I just listed, I would be willing to bet drops at least 1 slot from where they were last season. So by definition, they will not be as good as they were last year. All right? Now, in keeping with that general overarching thing of 1 or 2 of the top 5. Oh, you know what? Actually, let's go to the Eastern Conference. While we're having this little exercise, we got Tampa Bay, Boston, Washington, the Islanders, and Toronto. All right, Tampa Bay, after their monumental collapse last year, and they had one of the best regular seasons of any team in any sport in North American professional sports history. They're not going to be that good again this year either. They're not going to threaten 130 points on the season. But I do still think that they have, overall, top to bottom, the best roster in the Eastern Conference, and frankly, the best roster in the NHL. Okay? They're going to be around 108, 110 points again. But that's still a 17-point drop from what they were last year. And that means they're going to lose some games that the odds makers don't think that they should. You're going to be able to catch some plus 200, plus 230 bets against them this year. And you're going to want to be wary about laying that puck line because a lot of times their money lines are so thick that you have no choice but to bet against them or take the puck line. Boston made the Stanley Cup Finals last year. Older team, okay, played a lot of hockey to get to the Stanley Cup Finals and lost. And again, common theme, as you make it to the finals and lose, usually there's a bit of a letdown the next year. Add on those extra minutes, those extra games for this aging team. Boston is definitely a team I could see taking a step back. Washington, they finished in the top 4 in the East the last 4 years. They've been one of the most dominant franchises in Eastern Conference hockey for most of this decade, frankly. They're in kind of a similar situation as Boston. Their core is aging. I do think that they have a more top-to-bottom sound roster than Boston, even though they finished behind them last year. You got to remember that Washington was dealing with a little bit of the hangover effect from winning the Stanley Cup last year. So I can see them surpassing Boston, Boston taking a little slide back down. The Islanders, they finished in 4th last year, jumped from 11th and out of the playoffs the 2 seasons prior to 4th last year. They are definitely a team that I'm looking to bet against. I feel like what they did defensively and what their goalies were able to do, especially now that one of them has moved on, is unsustainable statistically from last year. So if you're looking for a team in the East that could potentially go from being a top 4 seed to out of the playoffs, the Islanders have to be number 1. Then number 5 is Toronto. Look, I got Toronto is shady ass team. They can beat anybody and they can lose to anybody on any given day. I don't like those teams. I like betting against those teams because they don't show up at times when they absolutely should. Now, looking at their early season schedule, I can see the Leafs getting off to a hot start, maybe building up a little bit of momentum. But I'm telling you, come January, their true colors are going to show again. January, February, March, I bet they're going to be one of the most frustrating teams to bet on in the entirety of hockey. So, those are our top 5 seeds in each conference. Some are going to step forward, some are going to step back. The majority of them will take a step back. In keeping with that, almost half of the teams that made the playoffs last year won't make it this year. On average, out of the 16 playoff teams, 5.5 of them don't make the playoffs the following season over the last 5 years. Okay, that means 5 or 6 playoff teams from last year aren't going to make the playoffs this season. So I'm not going to give the whole run through. We just went through 1 through 5. That's already half of the field. But the bottom line is this. If you can tab those teams early that don't look good, that don't look sharp, that don't look motivated, that are beat up, that just don't look like they have the same mojo as last year, that aren't producing the same results. If you can find those teams early and start betting against them aggressively, that's how you make money in hockey. Identifying those teams that were out of the playoffs last year, that look like they have some mojo and can make it into the top seeds, and finding those teams that were good last year that just aren't as good this year, because the odds makers are setting those numbers, setting those money lines based on who everyone was last year. All right, let's get into some season win total picks then, huh? I already talked about the Calgary Flames under 97.5. I like Dallas under 97.5. They improved their roster a little bit, but what we found with low-scoring grinder teams like the Stars is that it's very hard to sustain that from year to year. When you play a lot of close, low-scoring games, all those wins that went for you one year, they generally don't go for you the following year. I think 97.5 is high. I do think Dallas will make it back to the playoffs, but I can see them as more of an 8 seed than a team making a jump into that top 3 or 4 seeds. All right, Edmonton. Give me them under 85.5 wins. What is it about the Oilers that people love? I get it. Connor McDavid, he's this great player. I got it. They've averaged 82.5 points each season over the last 5 seasons. Their season point total is set at 85.5. Are they going to jump up and threaten 90 points this year? No. They still have a mess of a roster and one of the worst defenses in hockey. I don't see any improvement out of the Oilers. They're a fun and gun team. They'll pull the occasional upset, but they're shaky. I'll be surprised if they hit 82 points on this season. So absolutely love the Oilers under. Islanders under, as I talked about, their over-under is set at 92.5 points. I like them under. Give me Toronto under. I like Toronto on spec. I do. I really think that they could jump up into that 4th or 3rd position. They are not consistent enough to be the number 1 or the number 2 seed in the East. And it would not stun me if they drop from 5th or 6th in the regular season and then went on a tear during the playoffs. So I could see something like that out of them. But 101.5 points out of Toronto, I just absolutely don't see that from a team that's been so erratic and so inconsistent over the last several years. And then finally, Winnipeg, under 94.5 points. As I touched on, they're one of my number 1 teams that were in the top 4 seeds in the playoffs from last year that I think could not make the playoffs this year. I could see them dropping that far. Winnipeg has not gotten better in the offseason. They lost some key defenders. They underperformed last year in the regular season, by my estimation, and then they were bounced in the first round of the playoffs. So they are trending in the wrong direction. They didn't get better in the offseason where a lot of teams in the Western Conference did. 94.5 is a little bit high. I can see them finishing around 88, 89 points. So love the value of that play. So again, we got Winnipeg under, Toronto under, Islanders under, Edmonton under, Dallas under, and Calgary under. All right, so I'm sour on a lot of these teams. Not sour on them per se, but I just think that they're overrated. Team I think is underrated. I like the Blackhawks a little bit. All right, their season point total is set at 80.5. They're a young team. They got a lot of young pieces. But unlike Winnipeg, I think Chicago is pointed in the direction. I do think that they are steadily improving. They remind me a little bit of Detroit last year. Detroit was a team that I actually released to my clients the futures play on their season win total over, and they easily surpassed that. I can see a similar jump out of Chicago, and they could be one of those teams that nobody's talking about now, but is threatening for that 7 or 8 seed come April. And then finally, probably my favorite futures play, and I'm going out a little bit on a limb. You see that I'm sour on a lot of these teams. I'd say that my number 2 futures play is Winnipeg under. My number 3 is Edmonton under. My number 4 is Toronto under. 5 is Chicago over, and 6 is Dallas under. All right, those are in order, my futures plays. And I like the Anaheim Ducks over 80.5 points. Okay, the last 5 years, they have averaged 96 points per season. The last 4 years, they've averaged 97.3 points per year. That includes last year when they absolutely bottomed out with just 80 points. They were a train wreck last year. But they were a train wreck, and they still got to 80 points. Okay, we're not talking Vancouver, Edmonton, Ottawa train wreck. We're talking about a good team that had a bad year. They changed coaches, which I think will make a big difference. They had an exorbitant amount of injury bad luck last year that I don't expect them to hit this year. They got a little bit younger, a little bit faster. Yes, they let some key veteran pieces walk in free agency, but I think that's going to help them. Okay, I like that they got a little bit younger. They did need to change things up after last year and after not being able to make that breakthrough in the playoffs the last few years. And, I don't know whether or not they're going to make it. They're going to have enough juice to make it back to the playoffs. But I also do know they got a lot of cap room. If you're looking for a team around the trade deadline that could make a move to really improve themselves, Anaheim is in that spot. They got a lot of cap room, almost $10 million in cap space. So I could see them adding 1 or 2 pieces to help them make that final push. Will it be enough to get them back to the playoffs? I don't know. But in order for them to fail to top this number, which is 80.5, they would have to be even worse than they were last year. They really would have to bottom out as a franchise. And when I look at the roster, when I look at the front office, when I look at some of the moves they made, I don't see that. This isn't a team that's about to fall off a cliff into a major rebuilding period. So I have them around 87, 88 points for the season. I think they easily go over. So that's what I like. So that's it. That's my little NHL primer. Be sure to get yourself signed up today. It's an 8-month grind. All right, so strap in. The goal is very, very simple. It is to end the season, to end this NHL season in June with more money than what we have right now. I would be thrilled with a 20 or 30% return on our investment. That means a plus 2,000 or plus 3,000 season. All right, so compared to where you start, let's say you're starting with 10 grand in your bank account. That's your NHL gambling investment money, and you're betting $100 per unit. If you finish up 12 with that at 12,000 or 13,000, there you go. There's your 20 or 30% return. That's my goal. That's what I'm looking forward to. It's better than anything you'll find in the stock market. So that's it. Go to www.docsports.com. Get signed up for hockey, and let's do it. Carpe diem. Good luck.